Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Deepening the strategic partnership between the two countries, India and France on Saturday sealed business deals for $16 billion and signed 14 agreements, including security pacts that could help counter China's growing influence in the Indian Ocean region. French President Emmanuel Macron, who was welcomed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi with a hug at the airport, got down to business right away after a ceremonial welcome at Rashtrapati Bhavan. After meetings with Indian leaders, Macron called New Delhi a strategic partner of France in South Asia and said, "We want to be yours in Europe." The leaders of both the countries also reiterated their intention to start work by the end of this year on what could become the world's largest nuclear power plant, advancing talks that have continued for nearly a decade. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the bilateral relationship between India and France. Joining me on the program today are Sheel Sharma, former diplomat, Professor Sriram Sundar Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, and Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you, of course, and ask you what are the key takeaways from this visit?
Oh, it has set the stage for an extraordinary strategic partnership between India and France. This has been developing over the last 2 decades, actually ever since our nuclear test in '98, when France came out strongly to say that they will never put any bilateral sanctions on India. And from then on, continuously there have been a build-up. So these 14 agreements which have been signed today, and the security partnership, the arrangements for the operationalizing of the defense cooperation and the confidence agreements, the nuclear cooperation reaching another height by a declaration to have the first reactors in Jaitapur coming in by the end of the year, and the arrangements for Indian Ocean, the French concern on the Indian Ocean and India's concerns on the Indian Ocean, they have a confluence of deep interest and far-reaching actions. So, and the French have a territory also in the Indian Ocean. India is looking at this whole area for security, for a number of maritime interests like search and rescue, disaster relief, fighting the piracy, terrorism. And of course, India and France see one eye to eye as regards terrorism, because both countries have been victims of the kind of terrorist actions which have been perpetrated on their soil.
Sure.
So, and then there is this other dimension of the personalities. French President Macron today stands tall in Europe because he has a full support of his country, and there is a certain certain problems, set of problems which have come in Germany. So though Angela Merkel, who used to be considered very high, today she's still beset with the coalition politics now, though there's a coalition agreement. So okay. France has emerged as the standard bearer for Europe, stands for EU, and France and India share the international agenda on the burning issues of our time, like climate change, like fighting terrorism, like free trade. So all these factors bring them together.
Okay, all right. There are several factors that bring them together is what you're suggesting. Ambassador, I'm going to come back to you in just a bit for another reaction as well. Let me bring in the other panelists into the picture. Now, Alok Bansal, I want to stress on the Indian Ocean region and, the use of ports, the use of bases in the Indian Ocean region and how it's going to impact both the countries, India and France, and the third player, China.
See, we need to understand that France is the largest European country which has got a presence in Indian Ocean. It has a permanent fleet in Indian Ocean, and India has the largest littoral navy as far as Indian Ocean region is concerned. And once we collaborate, we need to understand French have large number of bases. They have a base in Djibouti, they have a base in UAE, then all around Madagascar, from Mayotte, Reunion, and there are a number of islands between Mozambique and Madagascar, and then going up to southern Antarctica. they have a large number of islands in this particular region. Now, if we start getting access, Indian Navy as it is actually providing succor to most of the littoral countries of the Indian Ocean region. We have been providing them assistance in terms of disaster relief and humanitarian assistance. So once we get free access to these ports, the operability of the Indian naval warships to operate from these ships increases, so thereby their reach increases, they can go replenish there, they can stock up in these places, and that enhances their efficiency as far as Indian Ocean region is concerned, because China is already talking in terms of Djibouti. They are trying to build, now there are reports that they are building another one near Gwadar, they want another bases coming up. So China is also looking for bases here, but if India, France collaborate, and of course India is also now collaborating with other powers as part of the Quad, and undoubtedly US is the largest naval force present in this particular part. That is as far as Indian Ocean region is concerned. Strategically the two countries are coming together. In fact, defense and nuclear deal have been the mainstay of India-France relations for a very, very long period of time. Rafale deal, Skopje, in fact, if you see the joint statement, they talked of INS Calvary, which was commissioned, and looking at this project, which could be taken forward as part of Make in India and things like that. So there is a huge scope as far as India and France is concerned. Unfortunately, the trade has still not matured to the level where it could have, because Indo-French trade is actually much smaller than Indo-German trade or Indo-UK trade. In fact, even within the EU, I think the trade with France is at number 9. Which for a country which is the third largest economy in EU, I think is we have not utilized, we have not attained our rightful level of trade with France.
Sure.
But I think in due course we'll have it. I think International Solar Alliance, renewable energy, there are a lot of fields I think where there's enormous scope between the two countries, and I think the right kind of fillip has been provided. Though of course the target sets are still modest, because we are talking of $15 billion euros, I think by 2022 or something like that, which will still not be as much as.
But it's better to keep modest targets and deliver rather than have some sky high targets and not deliver.
I agree.
Sure. Okay. Let me bring in Professor Sriram Chaulia now into the picture. This trade that Alok Bansal has just spoken about, do you see that turning around anytime in the near future? What needs to be done so that we can we can see the true potential of ties between India and France?
Frank, in today's time, global economy is such that trade and investment are interrelated. In fact, there's a lot of outward investment from India aimed at the European Union, but which is headquartered in Britain. So Macron wants to divert that to France and to position France as the gateway to Europe. Because of Brexit, he wants to show that Britain is going to be far less attractive to you, and so that will in turn, because you see, if Indian manufacturing relocates from Britain to France, then it will have an impact upon ancillaries trade and also upon parts and such things, which will in turn stimulate greater trade between the two countries. So I think civilian trade is going to expand, and nuclear commerce, as we are seeing, if Jaitapur goes ahead, I think it's going to be the world's largest such. Is that the answer to our energy needs? Certainly, you see, we have to move towards solar, wind and nuclear, right, to fulfill our Paris climate change commitments for renewables. And France, luckily, is taking the lead on both solar and on nuclear. So in many ways, Macron's visit has highlighted the energy security aspect a lot. Of course, defense, definitely Indian Ocean, geopolitics, the China angle, but above everything else, it seems like for energy security. The other point I just want to mention is, Macron has been talking big about how India and France should work for the next 1 decade to improve collective security. It's a term that the Europeans often use, and Macron is a very ambitious politician. And he's in that Gaullist tradition going back, 50 years, where France believes that it's quite independent of the United States and can steer the EU as the third power center in the world, besides China. So he
he is the top gun in the EU
right now,
at the
because
moment.
Merkel, as Ambassador was mentioning, Merkel is weak politically. So Macron is saying collective security, and he's talking about democracy and emphasizing that. There's no question. He's also directly criticized hegemonic practices in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. So from the Western and from Djibouti all the way up to Polynesia, which is the Southern Pacific, French territories are there, and if now they are accessible to us, it increases our power projection, but also helps us form these minilateral or plurilateral coalitions that are going to be very significant for us to maintain a stable Asia and one which is non-hegemonic and free of Chinese domination.
Indeed. Okay. Taking the point about the EU forward, you know, Ambassador, how is Macron's visit to India going to, you know, change the relationship that we have with other European Union countries, especially Russia as well?
Well, India-Russia relationship we should not bring into focus here, because that is a relationship which has a different dimension altogether. For instance, you know, we are talking of the first nuclear reactors between India and France coming by the end of the year. But there are already 2 Russian reactors which have been in Kudankulam, and many more are going to come. Russia, of course, has a different perspective of the global affairs. That's a different matter. As far as France is concerned, you see, whatever we've discussed so far, this addition I want to emphasize is that for the last 2 days we are now we've been full of the International Solar Alliance. I want to again put that in perspective, because that is something which is unprecedented. India and France today are together in a kind of a new unfurling of an international coalition, so to say, which looks at future, which is not bound by the trappings of the past or prejudices of the past. It is looking at what can be done in future, where our energy needs are paramount, and where these countries between the 2 tropics, which are abundant with solar power, with solar energy, can utilize that for their own benefit. So this kind of a coming together of 2 countries, and the kind of, he's talked about €1 billion which France would contribute for this. And naturally, and India has also come forward with Prime Minister Modi's announcements about funding for this whole process, and the setting of the Secretariat in India. Now, this will itself generate a whole lot of business, because it is the whole 10-point program which has been unfurled. It is full of actions, actually, tangible, doable actions. And each of them is connected with the actual economy. So this kind of coming together is going to give a further boost to India-France cooperation in multi-dimensions: trade, investment, technology transfer, training, you know, the whole gamut of those 10 points which Prime Minister narrated yesterday.
Sure.
So I think we should not ignore the positive impact of the developments which have taken place over the last 2-3 days, and the praxis which is promised of this International Solar Alliance.
Indeed.
That is going to be also, and it's a peaceful thing. And
it is.
You see
It is indeed a peaceful thing, Ambassador. I think, you know, Professor wanted to say something on this. Yeah, go ahead.
On solar, you know, it's a matter of great national pride and prestige that Prime Minister has been able to set up an intergovernmental institution headquartered here with so many members. And France is the perfect foil to Donald Trump right now, because as you know, Trump has washed his hands of any responsibility to the developing world in terms of climate finance and green finance. He has pulled out of Paris, and he doesn't want to give put a single dime on the table. Here is Macron, who belongs to more of a liberal internationalist tradition, centrist tradition in the European politics, and who's now saying we are going to continue down this track, and we believe in the 2 principal values that have upheld the world order: democracy, trade, as well as action on causes like migration and climate. So on all these aspects, right now there is a lot of convergence of values as well as interests with France. Of course, we have a separate thing going with the United States, but that's need not be. It's not a win-lose situation. We can have the cake and eat it too in this case. But France, Macron has pointed out that we are different from the US, and he's emphasizing that as well to make an entry into India.
Okay, there's a void being left with US withdrawing is what you're suggesting, especially from these aspects. Can Macron fill in that void?
He's attempting to do it in coalition with other like-minded players, because France alone cannot replace the United States. I mean, it just doesn't have the might.
Yeah, that's
or the
what
resources.
I want to point to.
So the idea is that if like-minded countries, especially India, which he sees as a democratic ally, if we come together, then he can project a kind of renewed faith in the liberal world order, which we are seeing due to the assault of this right-wing populism. Even in Europe, they are struggling with a number of countries moving to the extreme right. Now, Italy is in danger of falling in that camp too after the elections. So, Macron is looking for, kind of an affirmation, not just within the continent of Europe, but beyond, to try and build new kind of coalitions that will enhance his weightage on the world stage. So, being with Prime Minister Modi is for him also important, because that gives him a kind of a added prestige in the developing world, because now we are leading many new initiatives as net security providers and net givers of prosperity.
Sure. Let's take the discussion forward. Now, Alok Bansal, what role does India see for France in its geopolitical strategy?
We need to understand, right from the time India attained independence, we have identified ourselves with France, because the strategic autonomy which France has cherished from the time of Charles de Gaulle is what has been a role model. In fact, the way France came out of NATO without contributing troops actually and pursued an independent foreign policy, that I think to some extent had guided our foreign policy. So we have always identified with France. Post 98, as Professor said, France was one of the big countries which actually helped. I still remember President Jacques Chirac coming to India for Republic Day on 26 January 98. It was actually a big issue, because at that point of time we were globally isolated after the nuclear test.
Yes.
So now what we see is that there are certain congruence. We have talked of Indian Ocean region, but if you see this joint statement, both countries have said that Iran is complying with the stipulations. Now it's a very, very important statement coming at this point of time when United States is actually pointing fingers at Iran. This is a very important statement. What is even more important is on Syria, both the countries have said that we will, the Geneva is the only way. Now this for France is a big step, because France has been one of the most vociferous opponents of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Now to come to that level where we are talking of Geneva, and they are also talking of territorial integrity of Syria, etc. Now these are important statements coming from that. And I think talking of free trade and things like that, Indian Ocean is of course a very, very big issue which we are talking of, and India has acknowledged France's support in various groups. The way we were allowed to get into Wesenor and other treaty of, organizations, etc. So entire French support is being appreciated, and I think as far as these two countries are concerned, by and large, on every major issue in the globe we have a congruence. As I said, the only major dissonance that I could have perceived was on Syria, where I think Indian viewpoint and French viewpoint was quite different. But the joint statement says that yes, we will abide by Geneva. So France is also accepting that now there will be talks, and that will at least decide the future of Syria, and it will not be, it will no longer remain a very, very strong proponent of regime change, because if you realize, even before the US, it was the French who were actually gunning for Bashar al-Assad. So
I think France has come to terms that Syria is very complex at the moment, so let's just go with the wind.
That's why, and I think it's far more important to see what the statement says on Iran.
Indeed.
That the two countries accept that Iran is complying with the terms and conditions of the agreement that's been reached. Now, it's a very, very significant statement, and whatever is not said is, I think, even more important than what is said. Actually.
Said, yeah, sure. Yes, Professor.
Frank, I just want to add one thing. Our Prime Minister wants to expand our influence in Africa, not just the east coast of Africa, which is abutting the Indian Ocean, but towards the west of Africa, which is geographically further away from us, towards the Atlantic. Now, France historically has been the former colonial power in these regions, the Francophonie zone, as they call it. And there again, in countries like Mali, Niger, Chad, France has a military presence. So the fact that now we have this reciprocal logistics agreement means that at points of time we can also project power even further all the way up to the Atlantic, because historically we've been confined to Indian Ocean and to an extent to the Pacific, but to be able to reach all the way up to the Atlantic, navally especially, France is going to be one of the mediums for us. Of course, France is a little bit controversial in Africa because of its imperialist past and all that, but nonetheless, where it has solid agreements on the ground and facilities and installations, now they will be accessible to us. So you can think of France as a kind of a force multiplier for India as we are trying to create a comprehensive Pan-African strategy and all the way up to Latin America.
Indeed. Ambassador, I want to go back to a point that Alok Bansal was making about how there are there's a major geopolitical realignment taking place. On which side should India be, and going forward, should India focus on bilaterals or should we look at multilaterals as well?
India's approach has been actually all-embracing. So it works on the bilateral track very successfully. At the same time, it also works on the multilateral, or as they call, minilateral track. So with France, we have confluence of views bilaterally, of course, as been spelled out, and the joint statement actually gives a full picture of that. But like our relationship with EU is also bolstered by the French role in EU, like space, for instance, cooperation in space with EU and France. This is an important dimension of India's ambition in the coming years and decades about what we want to do in space. Similarly, about nuclear technology, France has been a standard bearer. Actually, France has always supported India in the multilateral groupings, and it was the first country which praised India's achievements in the nuclear realm, despite the ostracizing of India for long years. France came out to say how our safety is so good, how our reactor operations are very praiseworthy, and that way France continued to support India. Then the question of the UN, for instance, France still supports us and strongly supports us for permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Then in the WTO, for instance, India and France see foreign trade, international trade without protection. They are in support of activities, global trade under WTO rules, not the way it is now going in the protectionist measures. And protectionism will actually, tit for tat for protectionism will create a huge problem for global economy and global trade. So France sees it. And if you look at the last 15-20 years, you'll also find France, it always sees the world with great sobriety. It is not given to jumping into any bandwagon, suddenly. For instance, if you recall the kind of reluctance and hesitation which France had when America wanted to go to Iraq, and the wise counsel which France was providing, that is something one should bear in mind, that they see the global order in a different way from this swashbuckling kind of attitude which sometimes we find in leaders.
Sure. So, time now, Ambassador, to get quick closing comments from all of you, because I'm running out of time, starting with Alok Bansal first, of course. Are there any problem areas that need to be addressed going forward between India-France ties?
See, I think the biggest thing on which we are trying to work out is the defense deals. Rafale and Scorpion actually, and trying to make it a linchpin as far as Make in India program is concerned. Now, as far as Rafale is concerned, though the joint statement says that there has been adequate progress, but I think that's one deal till the time it actually fructifies and we have that could be an issue, because that's very important, because I think from 126 to the bringing down of orders to 36 is primarily meant to use the order for remaining 90 aircraft as a leverage for getting a Make in India project into India. So maybe that is the intention of the government. But considering various issues that have been raised domestically, as well as the progress as far as this project is, could be one of the issues that could be problematic. But by and large, I think the two countries are progressing very harmoniously. I think there is a congruence of interest. We have, as I said, there's a huge congruence of strategic interest.
Sure. Professor?
I think, the pressurized reactors that they are using as part of Arriva's cooperation for Jaitapur is untested, and there are concerns still among activists and local people about environmental hazards, and there have been some sporadic protests as well when Macron was here. I think we need to work together for safeguards and standards, and to make sure that there cannot be any Fukushima type breakout ever. And I think France is quite cognizant and a responsible power in the world, and I think it's going to work with us to try and ensure that we have complete nuclear safety, because this is the world's largest, and it's going to be a prototype for many other countries to move in this renewable direction. So I think we need to emphasize that especially. But counterterrorism is one area where I think we have a lot to share, and especially as the ISIS threat metastasizes across Africa and North Africa, where we have interest and increasing presence, I think we need to work very closely with them, both in the Middle East and in North Africa, to try and check these jihadist elements.
Sure. And Ambassador, close the show for us with the way forward for the two nations.
I think technology is one area where the two nations can really combine and work for mutual benefit. And it includes not only what is existing technology, but what is coming. We are at the cusp of technology, so future technologies are also very, very important. For instance, in the cyber sphere, in robotics, and in the gene technology, we need to work with France. They have also been doing, quite a lot of research in this area, and space, as I mentioned earlier. I'd also like to make a note of caution about falling in for these anti-nuclear activists in India. Actually, we should have confidence in ourselves. And if you see how we have done the two reactors in Kudankulam, how the safety of those two reactors has been strengthened, 400% or 500%. There are, and the various aspects of safety. So we are quite capable of looking after it ourselves. And the reason why India and France are coming together is not as a giver and a receiver, but as partners.
Sure.
And that partnership is what I want to emphasize. Generally, there's a tendency to reduce it to transactional things. Transaction is all right. That is the métier. Without that, you cannot really work. But we go beyond transaction.
Okay.
And, our national spirits, both in India and France, are such that they go beyond transaction.
All right, Ambassador, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for to all the guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. The conclusion here is the fact that, France and India go beyond just transactions. It is a true partnership. No real hurdles in the way as of now. And the future looks bright for India-French relations is what our panelists are saying. That's it from me. See you again next time.